Morning, welcome to a Sunday morning rant from a very sunny location, hence the reason why I look like a bit of a panda in Europe. So I'm bringing you this from my hotel balcony. As you can see, there is said capital. I'm not telling you where in Europe I am, but it's very hot here given that it's only April. Anyway, I haven't done one of these for a couple of weeks. Life has just got in the way. It sometimes happens. That's the way it goes. So I thought I'd make up to it and just bring you up to speed with my thoughts on music everywhere. First things off, I did go to see Mechanics. As I said, I was on the last rant, and yes, I didn't have enough time to actually do this on the Sunday because we went up to London and made a day of it. Saw Mechanics at the Albert Hall in the evening. Now, those of you who've never been to the Albert Hall in London, fantastic location, really is a fantastic location, quite intimate as well. I managed to luck out on the tickets, as I do sometimes. Centre stage, 10 rows back, beautiful sight of the band. And obviously Mechanics now is now made up of a slightly different cast to what it used to be. So it used to be Paul Carrack and Paul Young. Well, obviously Paul Young died, as in Sad Cafe Paul Young died several years back, and Paul Carrack's no longer involved. So now the lead singers are, and I'm going to regret this from saying this because I can't remember the other guy's name, but one of these, Andrew Roachford, who, if you're old enough to remember 1980s pop singer Roachford, is one in the same, and it's a pretty sort of much a newish band apart from the drummer thereon. So yeah, it was a corking evening. They played the old stuff you'd expect them to play. They played the new stuff from the album that's just come out. They also played some Andrew Roachford hits, which was really great fun because you don't hear him sing that often. And also, surprisingly enough, they played some Genesis hits as well, and they did them justice. It was a very, very, very good evening. So, unfortunately, I think that was pretty much towards the end of their tour. So, if you didn't see them, tough. You ain't going to see them this time round. But I recommend you go to see them next time round because it is a very, very, very good evening, and you will enjoy the music. So, I'm going to continue with something that's been bugging me. A couple of people PM'd me on the channel, and it seems that they've got the wrong end of the stick. So I'm going to sort of reset the stick, if you like. And this is all to do with restoring the factory sounds on your legacy set. Now, I probably rant on quite a lot about using cartridges and cards to restore the factory sounds. I'm a strong believer in that, and it's probably for two reasons. Number one, it's very difficult to corrupt the damn things, and number two, it is so quick. Okay, that's the reason why I'm a great believer in it. And if you've got say an M1 and an M1R, or an M1 and you see a video for an M1R and they tell you how to do something, then actually you can do the same thing on the M1. The buttons may be in a different place, but the same buttons will still exist. It's the same as the D50 and the D550 and a number of other rack mount units. The difference between obviously the rack mount and the keyboard is there is no keyboard. But the procedure you follow for one will be the procedure you follow for the other. What I'm thinking is, what I might do is make some videos of me restoring to the M1 and the D50 as opposed to the rack mount units, because I think that's where I made the videos of me restoring to the rack mount units, and that seems to have caused a rail of confusion, because people have seen me restoring to the rack mount units and not quite sure whether they can do the same procedure on the keyboard itself. Let me assure you, you can. Okay, that's not an issue. But the other thing is that has come out of this is people thinking that you have to go and buy a card. You don't. I do. You don't. So it's personal preference. If you hunt around on the internet, you can find the SYSEX files for these keyboards, okay, so that will do the factory restore. You will then be able to plug a MIDI interface into your computer, the MIDI into the keyboard, set the keyboard up, and you'll be able to dump the SYSEX down onto the keyboard. It's not difficult to do, it's a little bit fiddly and time consuming, and that's the reason why I don't tend to do it. I tend to use the restore cartridge or the restore card because it's far faster for me if I want to do something. And let's face it, I'm a bit of an impatient bugger when it comes to that sort of stuff. So just to be clear, what I'm not saying is you have to have the restore card. What I am saying is it's your personal preference. Use the SYSEX, dump it from the internet and restore it. And there's videos on the internet, and maybe I will make a couple in coming weeks that show you how to do this on some of those legacy keyboards. But you know, I sort of people are getting confused and asking me confusing questions, and I suppose if you're new to this stuff, it is a little bit confusing, but believe me, it's not difficult. It just takes a little bit of patience and stepping through what settings you need to set on the keyboard and your computer. Now, the thing you will find is quite often on the computer side of it is that you have to actually slow your computer down quite a lot in terms of the speed that it works at to be able to send the MIDI to the legacy keyboard, because those keyboards won't work at particularly high speeds. Okay, they're what they used to call a baud rate, which is bits per minute, or bits per second, should I say, is particularly low. You know, you haven't heard the word baud rate probably since the old modems, dial-up modems were in place. But that's really what it is. They're not particularly fast pieces of kit. They won't exchange information particularly quickly. So you sometimes have to slow your computer down, otherwise it just tries to send it too damn fast and the keyboard can't accept it. So that's that one. And the other one, which is really interesting, I'm not quite sure why this individual asked me the question, but I'm perfectly willing to answer it. And the question was, I'm going to replace my my disk drive, or the hard drive that's in the Kronos, and should I consider SSD? Well, my Kronos actually has an SSD in it, so the answer is probably yes. Why would you consider an SSD? Well, they're faster for starters. Let's think about hard disk technology. In a traditional hard disk, what you have effectively is you have a disk, and then you have a head, and the head makes contact with the disk and it reads the data off the disk. That's how traditional hard disk technology works. It's a mechanically driven thing, so the speed of data transfer off the actual hard drive itself is limited by the head spinning up, or the disk spinning up to the right speed to be able to read and write to the device that it's installed into or attached to. The solid state technology, which is an SSD, doesn't have any moving parts. It purely is chips in there, memory chips, and those it's the same idea. I mean, it still stores binary strings in ones and zeros. The difference is what you are effectively doing is you're switching gates on and off inside the chip itself, so you're changing the state of the chip. Hence the reason, because that's done in the chip itself, the read and the write on a SSD is a damn sight faster than the read and the write on a hard disk. But it is horses for courses. You have to think about what it is you're using the disk for. If you're using it for certain operations, say for example you want to store things for long-term storage, would you use an SSD? No, you'd probably use a traditional hard drive. If you're looking to work in your studio and actually with your DAW, would you use an SSD? Probably not a bad idea, because the speed at which the SSD will work will allow you to add more bits and bobs into your mix, if that makes sense to anyone. So you really need to work out why you would do it. But going back to the question, would you put an SSD in? Yes, I would. Now, the next point that comes off of that is I looked at my Korg, and I've got a 56 gig SSD in mine. I'm not sure whether that's a standard, but that's what seems to be in my Kronos. And I was sort of wondering about that, so I did some digging. And one of the things that you realise on an SSD is they do actually have a limited lifespan, and actually it's a more limited lifespan than a hard drive. Okay, because of the way it works. The chips are only designed to cycle between 10,000 and 30,000 times. Okay, so you can only, each one of those logic points, you can only switch it from a 1 to a 0 or 0 to 1 10 to 30,000 times, depending on the manufacturer of the SSD. That doesn't sound a lot, okay, but there are a lot of them in the disk. And the disk itself operates a piece of disk harmonizing software, I think is way of putting it, where effectively what it does is it looks at the state and a number of times areas of the disk have been flipped from one to the other, and it evens that out across the entire disk. So unlike like a normal hard drive will write in blocks, the SSD itself will write in the same sort of idea. So it will look for the next open space and then work its way out. Now, what that means is you get a very even wear across the SSD, and because you've got a very even wear across the SSD, it lasts a long time. Now, the caveat to that statement is that you shouldn't effectively load the SSD up. So if, for argument's sake, you think you're going to be playing with about 30 gigs of data, which seems to be the standard sort of Kronos type size, you need to size your SSD to go in your Kronos at 30, so that would be about 45 gigs. Okay. The reason why you want to size it bigger is because they recommend for an SSD that you don't run an SSD at more than 80% utilization, because as soon as you start utilizing more of the SSD with stored data, the less points in the SSD you have to move from a 1 to 0, and it therefore drastically shortens the life of the SSD. Okay. So and there's a video by somebody on the net I watched, and it basically says that if you have an SSD at 80% and you continue to run it at 80%, you probably get about 10 years worth of life out of it. However, if you consistently run an SSD at 90+%, that 10-year lifespan drops to about 2. So you can see how an SSD would fail quickly if you are completely loading the damn thing up. Hence the reason why my first comment is, what are you going to use the SSD for? If it's long-term storage and you want to store stuff and you've got bulk data to store, probably an SSD isn't the way to go. It's probably a hard drive. If you're looking for very quick I/O, then an SSD is probably where you want to be. That probably makes not a lot of sense to not a lot of people. However, it's me trying to explain, if you are going to put a new disk drive or hard drive into your piece of equipment, yes, you can put an SSD in. Most equipment will accept an SSD. Even a lot of legacy equipment will accept an SSD because of the way they retrofit them. However, make sure that you're not loading the damn thing up. Now, it is very sunny out there. I look like a lobster, but I've got other things to do today. So what I'm going to do at this point is say sayonara. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
I've been told it helps the channel out greatly if you hit the like button if you enjoyed the contents of this video. If you want to be notified about future videos that may be made for the channel, please hit the subscribe button.